Well, hello, friends, and we certainly do hope that you're enjoying the study that we're going through and the sessions that it presents to all of us. Now, we know that over time, questions may come up, observations, and or even statements that you would like to share with us, and we wanted to introduce to you a means by which you can make contact with us, and that is through email at billw@cgi.org. That's billw@cgi.org. We would love to hear at cgi.org. We would love to hear from you to help us out as well, because so often, we get into a mindset perhaps and are not aware necessarily of things that are crossing your mind as a result of the material that we may be covering. So don't be shy, don't be bashful, don't hesitate if indeed a question may emerge through the presentations that we share with you, and go ahead and just email us at this billw@cgi.org email address, and we will get them and hopefully over the ensuing weeks be able to address some of them, even perhaps subjects that you would like to see us address. We'd be more than happy to take some of those ideas and maybe build presentations around them. So one more time, billw@cgi.org if you have any questions or statements or observations to make, and we'll look forward to receiving those requests from you. So in the meantime, let's now get back to the study that we're going through. Well, brethren, today I want to go back and I want to revisit this health and wellness sermon series that I've been on for at least 3 parts anyway, parts 1 and 2, and redress part 3 in light of the fact that part 3 apparently turned out to be a bit too controversial. So we're going to try to redress part 3 and pick up where we left off on this subject and continue to address some of the more difficult things concerning this particular subject. Because let's face it, I think all of us would agree, health and wellness is indeed a controversial subject. And I've been trying to illustrate that in parts 1 and 2, and that's why I spent so much time on parts 1 and 2, was to illustrate the fact that we as brethren, as human beings, in all due respect to the way we handle our wellness and our health, is very, very individual. It's very personal. And we've been trying to, for all intents and purposes, illustrate the fact that we all have, or should have, the freedom and the right to choose what we put into our bodies, what we eat and drink, how we handle our illnesses and ailments, our aches and our pains. Because as I've been trying to portray in the first 2 parts, as we will try to reiterate some of that in part 3 here today, a lot of this stuff is just really a lot of very personal judgments, very subjective on our parts, because frankly it is based according to our conscience and our faith. Remember, we talked about Romans 14. We talked about 1 Corinthians chapter 12 that illustrated to us about this idea of being tolerant of our differences. And I think it goes without saying that we need to learn that. Paul, in Romans 14, was very articulate in illustrating the fact that we need to be non-judgmental about ourselves and how we deal with things in our life. And because we're talking about health and wellness, that's the subject, as we all know, because health and wellness is so controversial and so personal, that certainly these principles can be extrapolated and hopefully implemented and deployed and used as we interact with each other. And that's important, I think, to keep in mind, because how you may handle pain may not be the way I handle pain. I was playing basketball with my 12-year-old grandson over at the rec center, and he and I were getting pretty aggressive. I mean, he's getting really good. I call him spider arms. But at any rate, the ball got loose. I don't know who knocked it out, but the ball got loose, and I went after it, he went after it, and we went for the ball, and we rolled on the court. I fell on top of him and all that, and he got up, okay, and I got up, and he said, "Papa, you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm okay." And about 10, 15 minutes later, I wasn't okay.
I started shooting, again for the baskets, and all of a sudden I started feeling some old football injury in my back that I've had from years ago. Actually, I haven't felt it in decades. Come back, same place. So I had to sit down, and he ended up striking up some game with some other kids that were his age, and I just kind of watched. But point being is how I handled that pain, because I'm in perfect shape now, quickly. How I handled it may not have been the way you handled it. Some of us may have went with a pain pill. Some of us would have went with a hot bath and a massage or a sauna and see how that acts. But that may not be good for someone else, because that would be, that's just not the way I would do it. Give me my NyQuil. Give me my Excedrin when I have a headache. Whereas someone else may not. They may tough through it. As we talked about, someone who chooses to go the holistic method in handling their cancer rather than the standard procedure of surgery, radiation, and chemo. Does that make them any less or any better than the one that goes holistic? No. It's what, according to your faith, what you're comfortable with, brethren, and what you may have fears about. Not everybody is comfortable with hospitals. Although hospitals are good, we know that. They have their benefits. The technology today is just amazing. I was talking to a minister here just the other day. I won't tell you what organization he's in, but he was explaining to me a procedure he's going to have to go through with his heart. And years ago, 10, 15 years ago, this procedure would have required a person to be cut almost like open heart surgery and basically filleted back like a frog in a biology department and maneuvered the procedure. Today, they're going to handle it like they handled my meniscus. Heart surgery in this particular heart condition of what we were talking about, whereby they're going to do it with a little orthoscopic drilling with a hole and a camera, and very non-invasive. Nevertheless, somebody may not choose to do that. They may just decide to do something else and try to maybe use some kind of modality of sort, some kind of protocol of sort to maintain it with blood thinners and that kind of stuff that might still allow them to handle the effects and still live a very good life. How you handle an infection, or how you may handle losing weight. Somebody might favor the Atkins, somebody else would favor the keto. These are all personal choices, brethren. They're all predicated, as I say, on conscience, on our faith toward it, our fears about it, as well as what we're comfortable with in regards to handling these particular things. And so the differences that I am talking about here, and this is what is so, what you could say, disturbing about the day and age that we're living in today, and I think many of you would admit it, these would be all non-issues with us years ago. I didn't care if you got a flu shot. I didn't even know if you did get a flu shot. You didn't know if I got a flu shot. We never even talked about flu shots. Oh, some people may have. I never talked about NyQuil. I never talked about pain pills. The only time I usually talked about medication is when I would counsel people, and I would ask them as we would begin to get into their issues, because that is a consideration. We learn that in counseling. Are you medicated? What are you taking? Why? Because that tells me something. It tells me what kind of reactions, what kind of behavior, what kind of levels of perhaps even temperament. Because, brethren, let's face it, medications do indeed affect temperaments. They can affect your health in other ways. I'm sure many of you are all aware of the many advertisements we see on TV where they tell you the drug and some of these things you can't even pronounce, Paxil, and so on and so forth, and then they give you a long list of side effects to the point where it even says in some cases, and I have to laugh because I'm sitting there on my couch, and it says, and even death. And I say to myself, what? Even death? Why would I take this thing? You wonder, you just kind of rationalize this kind of stuff, But at any rate, my point is that these differences that I'm talking about and the way we would judge and determine how we're going to handle certain things, ailments, broken bones, head colds, allergies, you name it, these wouldn't even be part of our discussions and concerns with one another, because obviously it was just what you could say something along the lines of we all trusted each other's judgment and how you handled it, and far be it from me, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a holistic expert or a medical expert, but far be it from me to recommend certain things. I mean, we can talk about ideas and stuff and maybe what worked for me and what maybe you didn't try it, and maybe try it, nothing ventured, nothing gained, but the point of it is these were not topics of discussion. But today, they are. We are in a very, very volatile environment, brethren, where it seems like, and that's one of the reasons why I felt motivated to even talk about this subject, health and wellness, is because it seems like all around us we're obsessed. We're obsessed. The environment is obsessive with health and wellness. You can't turn the news on without hearing about health and wellness. And I'll just put it into that category with regard to the CCP and if you know what I'm saying. Because it's all around us. And it's something that we can't really get away from because, frankly, of all the controversial information out there that has been conflicting and so on, and the changings of guidance by some of the health agencies that we've seen over the 2 years now that we've been involved with, has created a firestorm of controversy. Admittedly, it has. And as a result, has caused a lot of folks to get quite exercised over certain opinions when they are expressed because of this conflicting information. But putting all that to the side, and without going down the rabbit hole of this pandemic that we're all very well aware of, getting back to health and wellness, I think we're all agreed to the fact that there is a wide variety of options on how to handle the requirements of maintaining our health and maintaining our emotional and even mental stability with the circumstances that we are now dealing with. And though they are a bit more intense, the fact of it is oftentimes can become very distracting for us and has caused some grief and has caused, in some cases, some tension even within the church among brethren. I want to take a moment and remind us of something that is very fundamental to our theology. And in the midst of this firestorm of what we believe or what we can see is really an obsession of health and wellness, turn our attention back to 1 John chapter 4. I want to just spend a little bit of time here on this particular scripture and a few others before I launch into what I really want to talk about today. Here in verse 15 of 1 John chapter 4, it says here, "Whosoever shall confess that Jesus is the Son of God, God dwells in him and he in God. And we have known and believed that the love, the agape, the affection of God, this affection that God has to us, God is love, again, agape, this affection. He that dwells, God is love, and he that dwells in this agape, this affection, dwells in God and God in him. And herein is our agape, our affection made perfect." This is how our agape or our love is made complete, and that's what the word perfect means, or fulfilled, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment, because as he is, so are we in this world. And as Christ was, would you not characterize Christ as fearless? As he was. That's how we should be, being bold in the day of contention and tensions, in the days of iniquity, in the days of counterintuitive opinions and essentially events and circumstances and situations, Christ was constantly battling headwinds in his 33 and a half years that he walked on this planet, and especially the 3.5-year ministry that he conducted. He was constantly contending with counterpoints and conflicts and contention in dealing with the religious leaders of his day. If he wasn't fearless and bold, brethren, we wouldn't have the kind of Savior that we have today. He may not have made it. What does John say here? He goes on with this point. He says, herein is our love, I'll go back to 17, made perfect, made complete, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment. And this is our day of judgment, by the way. This is your day of judgment. Judgment begins at the house of God. So you need to be bold in this walk with Christ as you attempt to attain and accomplish the mission in your life that God has called you to, and that is salvation and to enter in his kingdom. And so he goes on here, John does, in verse 18, he says, so there is no fear. Oh, that's what we're talking about here. That is what we're talking about. There is no terror. There is no alarm. That's what this Greek word means. There is no fear in affection, in love. Goes even to marriage. If you cannot give your heart to your mate in affection, undefensively and unworriedly, fearfully, brethren, you better slow the relationship down. You better slow it down, because you've got to get to the point where there's no fear in the relationship that you have, and that includes God. Fear God through respect, of course, but we're not talking about respect. We're talking about alarm and terror and fear in that respect and in that context. He says here, no fear of this affection, but perfect agape casts out this alarm, this terror, because that terror, that alarm, this fear has infliction. It has hurt. It has torment. He that fears is not going to be completed, is not going to come to the fulfillment that he should have in this agape that John's talking about. So it's very important, brethren, that we understand that fear has no place in our walk with Christ. And our confidence here, as pointed out in Hebrews chapter 4. Let me turn your attention there for a moment, just to remind us of these fundamental premises of our faith, because these are important benchmarks, anchors, to anchor yourself to and be confident with regard to your relationship with our God and our Lord and Savior. Seeing, it says here in verse 14 of Hebrews 4, then that we have a great high priest that has passed into the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our profession. This is what we profess. Hold fast what you profess, for we have not a high priest that cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, and that includes our fears. We have a high priest that can be touched with the same fears that we may be experiencing. And it doesn't always have to be with health and wellness either. I mean, fear can be the fear of losing a job, the fear of losing your mate, the fear due to some health or accident that occurred, of being paralyzed for the rest of your life. A lot of fears in life, right? A lot of fears, a lot of things to fear. But because we're on the subject of health and wellness, let's keep focused on that, because that's what we're talking about in this context today. He says here, but in all points he was tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore go boldly. This same word that was used over there in 1 John, parousia, same word, boldly, unto the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Meaning you're confident, you're not arrogant, you don't have an attitude of entitlement. That's not what this word boldness means. It means confidence. It means you're secure in your relationship with God enough to go out on the limb and petition him. We talked about precatory prayers here about a couple weeks ago, that you're confident of being able to, in the Christological framing of Christ and your understanding of what Christ represents, to be able to invoke God's help and or guidance and or intervention in whatever you may find yourself contending with, whereby you need his help in. And so you go to him not entitled, you go to him not arrogantly, not expecting, because he's God and you're his son, and you owe it to me, God. No. That's not what this word means. What this word means is you go there confidently, knowing full well that you're within your right to be able to ask this, but of course the prerogative of God still remains in terms of how he may answer you with your request. Over here in Isaiah chapter 53, many of us are well aware of this, but I want to make a point here. Verse 1, who has believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He has no form. He's got no attraction. He's not necessarily what you could say handsome, good looking. He's not the kind of person that you would be drawn to naturally, nor comeliness. And you can look up those Hebrew words and you'll find that that's exactly what we're talking about. He wasn't fair to look upon. He wasn't really, his visage was not attractive as some would define attraction in this case. He wasn't really in splendor or goodliness, physically speaking. He was very, what you could say, had no form, as the prophet says here, and nor comeliness. And when we shall see him, there's no beauty, there's no good looks here, that we should desire him. This is pretty clear, brethren. Jesus was an average-looking man, probably well built because of his vocation that included not only just carpentry, but lifting rocks and so forth. He was outdoors and so on. But it says here, there was no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised, he's rejected of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, because we've come to understand he was indeed the Messiah. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our sins, our lawlessness. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. And with his stripes, and this is the point I wanted to make as we described all these through these four previous verses, by his stripes we are indeed healed. Basically, though, of course, according to God's will. And that prerogative always does remain with the Father as he deems necessary and sees fit on how he's going to approach the intervention required or that you're appealing for in your given circumstances and situation. But that doesn't dismiss, that is God being our healer, it does not dismiss our responsibility. And we do have a responsibility, brethren, in this world that we're living in, to be proactive in order to preserve and maintain our own health and to do what we believe to be in our best interest. And that's where sometimes we can cause some confusion in regards to what we come to decide to do compared to what maybe God had in mind. Therefore, it's very critical, brethren, that you take time to think through the strategies of health and wellness that you are about to engage yourself in. And in the day and age that we're living in, it cannot be more highly recommended that you do your own research and consultation with those that are indeed qualified to give you the feedback you're looking for to guide you through your concerns that you might have. It's always good to follow that proverb that in the counsel of many there is safety, there is safety. Not just making a decision on your own and going off, especially when it involves your health and or perhaps even some long-term effects that, depending on your situation, may determine whether or not, like in my case, I was ever going to run again. Or like that first doctor that I shared with you in parts 1 and 2, where he said, look, you're too old. Get a bike. Stop. You're not going to run again. I said, no, I don't want to hear that. The guy didn't know me, of course. He was an older fella. I felt, in retrospect, with the way it all turned out when I found this younger doctor, and said, yeah, of course you'll be running. You'll be running in 6 weeks, no problem. When, as I said, you got to find yourself a good doctor. You get but you get 2 or 3 opinions on what the situation is. Compare the information you're getting. Use caution. Be patient with yourself as you walk yourself through the exercise of what you need to do or make the determinations that you're going to make as you go ahead and determine what your choice will be going forward. So from this point on, I want to make some considerations. I want to share with you some considerations. And let me say this. I am not looking for you to agree with me. These are considerations. Considerations. I don't necessarily appeal for any agreement in what I'm about to share with you. But what I would like you to do is consider the facts of what you're going to be introduced to and weigh that in with the concerns we all have as human beings in this room, those of you on the internet, in dealing with our health and wellness. Because, brethren, we cannot be naive to the conditions and the environment that we are living in today that is indeed real and has caused, without a doubt, and I think many of you would agree, a lot of tension for us to be contending with. And I'm saying this because, seriously, the information I'm going to share with you is difficult information. Maybe you're not even aware of some of this. Maybe this will be a first-time introduction of you into this information. But regardless, these are things that need to be addressed. Why, brethren? Why? Because God's church is hurting. God's church is hurting. There's a lot of what you could say tension, not only within our Sabbath-keeping groups, but even in the Sunday-keeping groups. God's church is hurting in this day and age that we're living in because of mandates, because of restrictions. People are losing their jobs, their careers. They're facing jeopardies like no other time by virtue of government overreach. These are realities. What's going on up in Canada makes what we're experiencing here like romper room. Just, we better pray that it doesn't come down our way. We've got congregations, brethren, in Canada that cannot even meet because of mandates, restrictions, and limitations. And sometimes just as simple as the fact that because of the facility, we rent a lot of the facilities that we meet at, they can't rent them because they're not open. The owners won't open them, and so they can't rent, so they're stuck. The majority of the Church of God International congregations in Canada right now are back on virtual meetings every Sabbath. They're going to meet on the internet through Zoom or whatever it may be that they have in their access. And these are things that are, frankly, due to the and it's just that reality that we're dealing with in this particular case. And some requirements of certain congregations, even for that matter, that they want you to adhere to, like us. We have our 10 house rules, don't we? You go to the internet of cgimedina.org and you'll see our congregational rules of the house. And certain other congregations have different rules of their house. And these rules vary depending on what perhaps that congregation and or / leadership in the ministry and so on determine to be what you could say the best and safest for their congregants. So, yes, I'm addressing some of the elephants in the room. But brethren, we need to be mature about it. There's nothing wrong with addressing some of these things and bringing them out in the open and having a conversation so that we can at least address some of these things. And all I'm saying is I want to add some things for your consideration. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm just mentioning this to you so that we're not naive about the day and age that we're living in and how those circumstances of the day and age we're living in impact us personally and can affect us mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and of course, physically. So it's important that we, I believe, understand and recognize some of these things. So let me introduce to you two broad categories of health care. Now, I mentioned this before, but I want to redress this in this case. And again, keep in mind, I'm still laying groundwork. I haven't told you what I'm really talking about. I've given you three parts. Each part has been a segment in itself, but they all interplay with each other. I described in part one, it's kind of like we're in a car and we're driving down the road and we're looking out the window and we're seeing the landscape change as we move along in this topic. And so I would like to characterize it that way so that we don't just take part 3 out of context of parts 1 and 2. And I suggest that if you haven't heard parts 1 and 2, that you go back. They were done about a month or so ago. You can find them. They're marked when you start playing them to be very clear that it's part 1 or part 2. But in this particular case, these two broad categories of health care, as I mentioned, is the medical field and the holistic field. Two broad categories that represent two very contrasting segments of health care. I mentioned in part 1 and 2, and I'm not going to belabor this, hospitals are good. They have great value. The technology today is just amazing. It is stunning. It is eye-opening in some cases and even jaw-dropping on how they can do things in today's day and age, as I've already portrayed with regards to this heart surgery that this one minister is going to have to go through. The fact of it is, we are living in a day and age where places like the Mayo Clinic, Sloan Kettering, Johns Hopkins, even the Cleveland Clinic right here in Cleveland are awesome facilities for healthcare management, insight, doctor resources and assets, and even, if need be, surgery access to handle whatever might be needed on a more serious basis. By the same token, the holistic field is also growing in clinics and availability for treatments in that area through doctors that are more holistic in their orientation. And in this case, let me just define holistic. The holistic field is an organic or functional functions and relations between parts of the whole with an emphasis on the cause, not the effect, as opposed to, many cases, the medical field, which focuses a lot on treating the effect rather than getting at the cause. And those are two very diametric, opposite contrasts of approach in those two broad healthcare segments that you need to be aware of in many cases, because let's face it, we are a physio-organic membrane. We're human, and there's a lot of things going on in us. Any doctor that is going to treat you that doesn't take a blood analysis for you out of the box, I'd highly suspect that fella or woman. You need to have your blood analyzed. You need to be basically reviewed, your history and so forth, before you even begin, or at least I would think, begin to allow somebody to start treating you on one thing or another. So it's very important that we approach the medical field and the holistic field, and I say both of them, with caution. And neither one is better than the other. And the fact is that you may not just use one or the other. You may use a combination of both in some cases, because they both have benefits to offer that the other one doesn't have, and of which, if indeed your particular situation calls for it, you may want to go ahead and dip into the assets of one over the other in this particular segment of whatever care or whatever concern you may have. So it could be that you might end up using a little bit of both of these healthcare sectors. But my point that I want to make here is that one is not better than the other. But we do need to do our own research on just how effective we think the modalities that we're considering will be upon our adopting it or so. And that means also to take into consideration the downside. Again, I go back to those advertisements on television when they're advertising Ritalin, they're advertising, all these drugs and pharmaceuticals, and then after they tell you what they're for, they tell you, well, it could create diarrhea, it might cause you to get dizzy, your blood pressure may drop and you'll have to be resuscitated. Make sure your mate's close, dial 911. No, I'm just kidding, but nevertheless, you know what I'm saying. They give you this list of side effects that oftentimes sounds worse than the problem you're contending with in some cases. So what I'm saying is that there is a downside, and I think it would be naive of us and certainly remiss of us not to go ahead and address the downsides as well. So I want to go ahead and bring forth some considerations, and I want you to keep in mind I'm doing this because as part 1 and part 2, you put them all together. This is part 3. So we're working our way through to finally what I'm going to introduce to you, hopefully next week as part 4, to wrap this up. But here in part 3, what I want you to remember from part 1 is you are the temple of God. You are and represent an administration of God. You are the church. And when you read 1 Corinthians 12, there are different operations, there are different administrations. Extrapolating that onto me as a church, a molecule in the body of Christ, I have a certain operation that I logically think through certain things in a pattern that I've learned over my years of life that drive me to make the decisions that I make, as you do. We all do. We all do. That's the way it works. And we sometimes develop these patterns over time that are not always good. And that's why we need each other. A man left to himself is dangerous. It's good to have friends of like mind so that you can talk to them, so that they can keep you a little bit in check, so that you can maybe balance yourself against an opinion that may not necessarily be like yours, but it does have a connection with yours. And it helps you to, as I say, be kept in check. So it's important that we're not naive about certain things in life. And one of those things that we don't want to be naive of is that, in this case, keeping this in mind, that you're the temple of God. And we are surrounded in a world of bacteria and viruses. Would you agree with that? Every day, and that's why it's so important your immune system is strong. You are exposed. You don't even know what you're exposed to in some cases. We walk around asymptomatic, but you know what? We could be carrying, as we've seen this proved over and over with these tests, if you want to believe the results. I'm sure some of the results are not necessarily believable, but nevertheless, some of them I'm sure are with all the ones that they're doing. So even if you took a 10%, 20, 30% range, the fact of it is, what we've seen proved is you can be asymptomatic and still carry a virus. The Cleveland Browns proved that very clearly back when they played the Las Vegas Raiders. It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. But at any rate, the bottom line is 21 of those guys couldn't play. They were in health. Baker Mayfield was saying, I feel good, let me play. No, you can't because you tested positive. But I don't have no symptoms. Too bad. Sometimes you could be carrying a cold virus, you wouldn't even know it because it hasn't broke out. You're not sniffling. You're incubating, and depending on your condition of your immune system, eventually it could develop into symptomatics that would indicate that you're sick. And then, of course, hopefully you would manage yourself and not go here and there or anywhere with regards to the contagions that you might be carrying. But in all due respect, keep in mind diseases and sicknesses, aches and pains, here it is now, first consideration, are indeed, without a doubt, positively, identifiably, big business. Would you agree with that? Big business. I'm going to quote from a book here, and I recommend this book, by the way. It's a 1-minute cure, The Secret to Healing Virtually All Diseases by Madison Kavanaugh. It's a good book. It's a balanced book in some respects because it takes to task not only the medical segment or sector, but it takes to task also the supplemental sector, the dietary sector, the mineral sector, as we would call it, the more holistic sector. It takes both sectors to task with regard to his approach to this particular subject. And on page 15, I just want to quote, under the heading, Disease is Big Business, the Awful Truth. Here it is. Fact, capitalized. Americans spend more on health care, yet are sicker than most other people in the world. Americans suffer from higher incidences of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, lung disease, and a host of other diseases, even though all those diseases are both preventable and are indeed able to be healed. Americans are spending, get this, you ready? Big business? Woo, listen to this. Americans are spending over $2 trillion on health care. Americans, we're not talking about the world. Americans, USA, not Canada, USA. $2 trillion on health care. That figure is expected to reach $3 trillion by the end of the decade. We're 2022, 8 more years. $3 trillion market. Think business. Think big business. Over $1 trillion of spending is devoted to the pharmaceutical drug industry. So of the $2 current trillion of that market size of the pharmaceutical medical sector, $1 trillion, half of it, about 50% of it, is the revenue stream. The revenue stream. I mean, if I'm a CEO, I'm looking at the revenue stream, the expendables, as we would call it, the repeatables, as we would call it, which is the high market. I used to have repeatables in my business. I had capital sales, of course. My big capital sales, $100,000 deal here, $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 deal here. But then I had my expendables. That's where I really made my money, on filters, on parts, on service contracts, the little things, the tanks, the repeating business. That's where the margins were. My mother used to always say she owned a bar. You never made any money on beer. You made money on whiskey. That's where your profits were. It was on the whiskey, not the beer. Beer was just kind of the come-on. That's why Mom used to always say, because she ran bars all her life. But at any rate, it goes on here. With these kinds of revenues, there's no incentive on the part of the pharmaceutical industry to promote better health. They are the most profitable industry in the world, enjoying, get this, average profit margins of 30,000 to 50,000% margins, percent, on pharmaceutical drugs over the cost of a raw material. Now, that doesn't include the research, the time, the engineering, and all that stuff. But the cost of a pill or a capsule versus what goes in it to make it and manufacture it. Eli Lilly was one of my biggest accounts. I used to always go over there in Indianapolis because we used to provide all the high purity water for Eli Lilly and their manufacturing of pharmaceuticals. And it was an amazing, amazing production scene that you would see going there with all the stainless steel tanks and pumps and pipe and all of that stuff, really a medical environment of sort, and how they made literally gallons upon gallons upon gallons of XYZ pharmaceutical or injectable for hospitals, and then they bottle them just like a water bottling company, and they send them out to the hospitals. And they were making a lot of money. Once they get through the engineering and all the upfront costs, these profits and the margins, they get it on the back end, and it is certainly very profitable for them. Sometimes their markups can be as high as, get this, 569,000%. The average business person in his right mind wouldn't dare walk away from such profits and would do almost anything to ensure that that trillion-dollar cash cow remains, in this case, remains intact. So money's a big factor, and that's my first point of consideration. I just want you to consider. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm just reading out of a book here that this individual did a lot of research. So I'm just bringing this to your attention as a consideration when we think about the medical sector, and we're going to get to the supplement sector. Just be patient with me here, because this is not a one-sided presentation, because they both run the risk of corruption. Why? Because of the money involved and the ease of making money to do the things that they do. I could go into the bottled water business and make a real good profit and end up just bottling city water and claiming that it's, until somebody tests it. And that has happened. That has happened, by the way, with bottled water companies doing that kind of stuff. But the big pharma category, as I say, is not alone in this particular situation. Let me quote to you from the Gentleman's Fitness magazine. Quoting here now with regard to the supplemental sector. The average American spends around $56 a month on dietary, not supplemental, dietary. I was actually surprised at some of these statistics. Supplements. 43.8% of gym goers use nutrition supplements. Americans, not worldwide, Americans spend approximately $2.1 billion each year on weight loss nutrition supplements. The food supplement industry, vitamin C, vitamin D, all these other food supplements, vitamin C, the food supplements industry of the U.S., not the world, U.S., was worth $42.6 billion in 2019. From USA Today, this article is quoting, the American consumption of dietary supplements surpassed 60% of the population in the last 15 years. Last 15 years, more than 60% of the United States population is taking supplements. That's a big, repeatable, expendable business. Even though, as attested in nutrition statistics, less than 10% of Americans are actually officially diagnosed with nutritive deficiencies. So we think we're suffering from lack of this or that or the other thing, but we're really not. That's why, again, maybe it would serve us well to go get a blood test and determine what we're really low on so we can focus and target what we are really lacking. 98% of the adult supplement users were taking vitamins and minerals. The most popular type of nutritive supplements by far, according to a 2018 survey. 75% were taking multivitamins. 37% were taking vitamin D. 34% were using vitamin C. And you could, I'm sure now, because of this pandemic, zinc would be up there. Although they don't have that statistic in this particular paper, but I would venture to say that it's easy to logically assume that that would be true. On an annual level, Americans spend over $32 billion on dietary supplements like vitamins, minerals, botanicals, and other healthy living enhancers. And get this, little sideline. 383,230 job positions were directly connected with this industry. The production of the raw materials, the pills, the capsules, manufacturing of the tanks, the stainless steel tanks and the pumps and the pipe, and also all the assorted ancillary production jobs that go into feeding this industry. 383,230 jobs was basically attached to the supplemental sector, the holistic sector. The total direct economic output was estimated at $51.25 billion in 2016, which was quite a bit of money. Continuing on, though, just one last quote on this particular nutrition area. Back to the book, 1 Minute Cure, by Kavanaugh, quoting regarding the sector of holistic supplements, minerals, dietary pills, and so on. He says, or whoever wrote, I'm not sure Madison is a woman or a man, but nevertheless, says here, nutrition is big business also. According to Nutrition Business Journal, MBJ, the estimated size of the U.S. global nutrition industry, and this is worldwide now, $228.3 billion. Although it's not a trillion-dollar business that the pharmaceutical industry enjoys, at almost $250 billion, it is a major industry consisting of companies that tend to market creatively in order to earn as large a share of the ever-expanding nutrition market as possible. So we have now, what we've just decided, we have a $1.3 trillion combined market. A $1.3 trillion combined market of supplements as well as pharmaceutical meds. Considering, back quoting on page 28, that was 27 before, this is 28, considering the abundance of unsubstantiated health claims and hoaxes that exist in the nutrition marketplace, as a consumer, it would serve your best interest to be weary of how profit-driven companies will use the power of erroneous but enticing pseudo-logic and doublespeak, supported by emotional appeals to your fear of disease, to sell you their products. Some creative marketers will even resort to instilling the belief in you that scientists know more about health than you do. They will reinforce your need for their products through exposure of advertisements and propaganda that most people cannot resist. And I can't tell you how many, I don't know why I even get them, advertisements I get on how to grow my hair back. and I have to admit, I've tried a few. and I'm here to tell you, they're hoaxes. They're hoaxes in so many cases. Waste the money. Don't even waste your time from that standpoint. You know, learn to embrace your new circumstances. That's what I keep reminding myself about. But at any rate, going back here to the 1 minute cure on page 16, I want to pick up where I left off. And again, shifting to the pharmaceutical industry again, from the holistic, now we're talking about the pharmaceutical industry again. We're talking about them. As a result, the pharmaceutical industry, in addition to the fact that it's a $1 trillion market of just pharmaceuticals, as a result, the pharmaceutical industry has assembled a pharmaceutical cartel consisting of an army of lobbyists that influence not only the entire medical industry, but also the U.S. Congress, and by extension, the lives of the entire American population. A CBS 60 Minutes program, 60 Minutes, CBS, quoting from that program here, revealed congressmen are outnumbered 2 to 1 by lobbyists for the pharmaceutical industry that spend over roughly $100 million a year in campaign contributions and lobbying expenses to protect their profits. Because of this pharmaceutical lobby, almost it never loses its political battles. The pharmaceutical industry has more to gain when people are sick than when they are well. Therefore, they manufacture drugs that only relieve symptoms but not necessarily cure diseases. There's a vested interest in keeping people sick because of the big bucks are in the drugs for the ongoing disease. I'm not asking you to agree. Not asking you to agree with this. What I'm doing is asking you to consider some of this as you begin to evaluate whatever you're dealing with in your health and wellness situation, when you begin to consider the modality or protocols that you are attempting to adopt for your cure of whatever is indeed ailing you. On page 19 of this same book, again, I'm not asking you to agree with this, but these are difficult things to hear, yet nevertheless are indeed real. Here it is. Fictitious diseases are invented, and I'm back quoting on page 19 of this book, all the time by the pharmaceutical industry for no reason other than to sell prescription drugs. If you've ever wondered why all of a sudden there's an entire array of new diseases that were unheard of 10 years ago or more, this is the reason. Diseases like intermittent explosive disorder, parentheses, bad temper, bereavement-associated depression, parentheses, grief, Anybody that's going, I'm going through grief. I lost a dear friend. Sandy's in the audience here. She lost her loving husband. We're going through grief. They have an associated, bereavement-associated depression. That's what grief's. Hyperactive sexual disorder, parentheses, low sex drive. Pornography addiction, compulsive buying or gambling, excessive internet use or pornography, pornography addiction, an ADD, which is attention deficit disorder, and ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, are examples of such so-called diseases. ADD and ADHD, for instance, are simply conditions usually brought about by overconsumptions of refined sugar, junk food, soft drinks by children. Did you ever do an experiment? I've done it with my grandson. I get him off the pop, and all of a sudden he calms down. Give him the pop, about 20 minutes, half hour, he's wired for sound. And you can see it. Try it. I mean, it's an amazing thing that you see. It goes on here, the media declares ADHD is an epidemic of sorts because there are reportedly 6 million children in America, 13% of the country's school children, who are diagnosed with ADHD. The drug, Ritalin, became so popular because they made ADHD a bona fide disease that required a prescription. And so psychiatrists were only too happy because they got kickbacks from drug companies every time they prescribed Ritalin for the children, who really were just a bit overreactive or overactive, probably because, again, they were eating too much sweets and sugars. Furthermore, in recent years, there has been an upsurge of the use of powerful psychotropic, mind-altering drugs to children as young as 2 and 3 years old, at least in foster care, in the foster care industry. Because it is much cheaper and easier to keep them quiet than providing time-consuming care. The number of prescriptions for chemical straitjacket drugs like Prozac, Paxil, Zyprexa, Depakote has increased by more than 100% between 1995 and 2000. Clearly, the pharmaceutical industry wants to categorize the majority of the population as having some kind of disorder. And if there isn't a legitimate disorder, why, one can always be invented. For instance, social anxiety disorder, which is shyness or lack of social skills. The fear of public speaking, or just two so-called disorders that attempt to encompass the entire population. Everyone suffers from one degree of shyness or another, depending on the social situation, and fear of public speaking is a natural fear that most people have. These are not diseases at all, but rather normal human tendencies or behavioral differences. But when they're categorized as disorders, doctors are given the freedom to push a variety of drugs on you, such as duloxetine. What's that for? Bereavement. Escitalopram for excessive internet use. Divalproax sodium for intermittent explosive disorder. Topiramate for compulsive gambling. Fluvoxamine for compulsive buying. Natroloxone for pornography addiction. And this is the one I should be taking, Qutipine. Yeah, Qutipine for fear of public speaking. I could take Qutipine for fear of public speaking. You see what's going on here? You see what's going on here, brother? We need not be naive about all of this. It's important that we understand we are in a world that is driven by corruption, lies, and in some cases, for sure, Satan the devil. It's a satanic world that we live in. And it's important that our eyes get opened to a lot of this stuff because, frankly, these are two segments of our healthcare industry, and they're the only segments we really have choice for. You can go holistic, or you can go medical, or you can have a combination of the two. That's all I'm saying. And I'm not saying, again, you have to agree with what I just introduced you to. But these are realities. These are realities we're surrounded by that's going on right now. When I walk into Eli Lilly, all the times that I did, because I was an accounts manager for Eli Lilly, believe me, they had an overhead that you couldn't believe. I mean, they were literally they had to crack a nut of millions, if not billions of dollars every year to cover their overhead and costs. So the engineers, the production, all the equipment, the replacements of it, the hiring, the transferring and trucking and all the things that they did. It was a business. There is a business side to this. And Merck, Moderna, J&J, you name them, all of them, AstraZeneca, all of them are indeed making money hand over foot at the expense of people that don't do their research. All I'm saying, I'm just raising a yellow flag, brethren. I'm raising a yellow flag. Don't be naive about this. I don't mean this to be a criticism. Don't get defensive. What I'm saying is these are realities we're dealing with here. And so it is that we should be aware of it, that there's another side, a downside to the considerations when thinking about the modalities and, of course, the protocols we're considering to engage ourselves in. That's all I'm saying. And it's important for us to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to cut it off here. Time's run out on me. And we're going to hopefully pick it up and end next week what this subject has to offer us, and again pick up where we left off in part 4, as I say, for next week. So stay tuned, and eventually you'll find out what this